Hello?
Where have you been?
Just sleeping, having a nice power nap after Star Fox Assault.
You've been out for 2 weeks.
Shit the bed, what?
Wait, shit the bed? Did you shit the bed again?
I don't know what you mean by again. Or ever.
Yeah, you've been out for 2 weeks.
Well, shit. That Star Fox Assault review really took a lot out of me.
Okay, well get started on the Star Fox Command review as soon as possible, okay? We have a deadline to keep.
Thanks, broski. Have a good one. Hello?
It's been 3 weeks.
Oh, son of a bitch!
Three, two, one,
Go! Welcome back to the
Star Fox-a-thon!
your definitive Star Fox review series. Alright, let's cut to the chase for once, okay? Do I like Star Fox Command? Tentatively, yes.
His mind is deviant, it must be purged.
Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit! You'll never take me alive, fuckers! It's hard for me to imagine what this game did to earn the reputation it has. For years leading up to this review, I heard nothing but the absolute worst Star Fox game, and yet, after having played it a few times through, I came out with the conclusion that it was a really solid game. Does it have flaws? Absolutely. But considering I was expecting the worst game in the series and thoroughly enjoyed myself in the end, it makes me wonder, what did I miss? What's so bad about this game that people have gone as far as to say that it has no reason to exist? I feel like there's a massive piece to this puzzle that I'm missing. Maybe, and this is just me speculating, it's because I have no personal attachment to the Star Fox franchise, and being able to see this game through a fresh perspective makes me less inclined to hate it for what one might consider betraying the series as a whole. Makes you think. Or does it? Or, and this is a very possible scenario, something inside of me is just very broken. In any case, developed this time by Q Games and released on August 28th, 2006 in North America, but as late as January 2007 in Europe, Star Fox Command is as yet the final game in the Star Fox continuity and was made to capitalize on the success of the recently released Nintendo DS, taking aspects from all previous games in the series, including the unreleased Star Fox 2, while also having many ideas for itself, including the deliberate design to take full advantage of the Nintendo DS hardware. And when it was released, it received a very positive critical reception, praised for its smooth controls, fun inventive gameplay, its great use of the DS hardware in every aspect, and more. But as time has gone on, the only people who still cared as the dust settled declared it an abomination. So here I am, as ever, once again, to declare if this game holds up to a fresh perspective, and even though I've already shown my hand in telling you what I think about this game overall, see if the hatred is deserved, and once and for all, see if this game, Star Fox Command, passes the nostalgia test. Star Fox Command is an odd duck to talk about because there's so many ambitious things it does from the core gameplay to the story, but there's also, I'm just gonna count this right now. Shit my nose, really? 32 different missions over, oh fuck me. Fuck me indeed. 27 branching paths and 9 different endings, which is what makes this game so hard to talk about thoroughly. To see all the content in the game, you'd need to play it. Fuck maths! Suffice it to say, this is the most robust game in the entire Star Fox series. The plot at the outset is that after the events of Star Fox Assault, the members of Star Fox have all gone their separate ways. Peppy replacing Pepper as head general of Corneria after Pepper falls ill, Falco drifting from job to job trying to recapture the thrill he had in his glory days, Slippy finds love, and... What?! Mark? Do your thing. Shocking! And Fox and Crystal finally hook up, like, Jesus Christa took them long enough. However, fearing her life would be in constant danger, he forced her to leave the team, prompting her to end the relationship and run away. And that's where the story begins. Set around 2 years after the events of Star Fox Assault, a new enemy arises from the poisonous seas of venom, the Anglers. But Fox, being the only one left, jumps in and decides to fight them alone, and that's pretty much as far as I can go. Not because the story's too complicated, or even for the purpose of spoilers, it's the fact that this game splits off into so many alternate paths that analyzing each one could take hours. But there are key themes that tie them all together. A popular knock on this game is the fact that all the characters are completely unlikable. And that is true, to a point. Most of the characters start out as unlikable douches and don't care about each other and have moved far beyond Star Fox, but that's the point. In the years since the team disbanded, they've grown apart and often come across as complete assholes to each other. They're unlikable, yes, but they're unlikable so that they can be redeemed through their actions. You know, this little thing called an arc? You see, by the end of Star Fox Assault, the individual characters had progressed to the point where they could no longer continue to develop as a team. Their personalities are as fleshed out as they're ever going to be, the characters are as happy as they ever will be, and any adversity and any personal strain that a new adventure could provide would not logically affect the individual characters and relationships that much, or at least not as much as previous games, because they've all developed beyond that. And so the only logical way to continue to develop them further is to separate them and make them go through individual adversity. This happens a lot on TV, where you have characters whose personalities are intertwined with that of other characters, but when they've developed as much as they can, they have one or more characters separate for one reason or another, and so they have to learn to survive without the other person, and if done right, this can be very compelling. Aside from that, separating the characters can provide interpersonal conflict built on how much they've changed in their time apart, which can also be compelling if done right. And in Star Fox Command, it's usually done well. As I said, there are a bunch of branching paths, and how characters are portrayed is dependent on which path you take, and each character's likability depends on which path you choose for them. It's easy to say that Crystal joining Starwolf was a selfish thing for her to do and makes her unlikable, so that when she eventually becomes an outcast because of it, and flees to the furthest corners of the galaxy to get away from her grief and renaming herself to Cursed. One sec. That might just be the most laughable fanfiction-y name I've ever heard for that kind of thing. She might as well have been named Angst, or The Brood, or I Have Issues McFamily Problems. Okay, I apologize. That was very insensitive of me. Anyway, you may think she deserved it, but it's all up to you to decide whether or not she goes with Fox or stays with Starwolf. The characters' likability are up to you and how you choose to play the game. Only if you make the right choices will the characters be redeemed, their arcs be completed, and they become likable characters. You decide through the characters' actions how they develop and change. It's almost an allegory for life itself. Only if you make the right choices will you become who you want to be. It's the circle of life. Please don't scratch me. If you make selfish choices, the characters suffer, and if you make choices a logical human being would not make, then the characters are portrayed as subtly blind idiots. If Fox joins Starwolf, of course he's gonna get played like a caffeine-addicted banjo. And in the game's happiest endings, everybody who needs to be redeemed are redeemed in the most touching way possible, and that's where the characters go through the best changes on screen. So I find the "they're unlikable" complaint invalid, as they're justifiably unlikable as to provide decisive arcs so that they can change based on the actions of the player. It's all solid stuff. The super duper happiest path, as I mentioned, feels like a complete experience story-wise, where every character gets a full decisive arc and comes out a better person. I think there's a problem with a lot of these paths in that they don't include certain characters as much as they should. Like, with the exception of Dash Makes a Choice, Dash doesn't show up more than once, and this is the guy poised to retake Venom in memory of his beloved grandfather, Andross. Seems like a big point you'd want to include in the game, right? But in one path leading to the Fox and Crystal ending, i.e. the happiest ending, Dash doesn't show up until the ending itself. So those who chose that specific route would be asking themselves, what am I having for dinner tonight? Whoops. Who is this shitty ass? Hey, language! Fuck you. That's one example, but I think the best example of this would be in the path leading to the ending Goodbye Fox, which has two major problems. One, the ending is so sweet I think it gave me diabetes, and two, the big thing that separates that ending from the other endings just comes out of nowhere. After the penultimate level, Fox decides that after they defeat the Anglers that he's going to try and find Crystal to retire desire to be with her for the rest of his life. Once again, this has no build-up, and is so jarringly sudden that it seems like it was just pulled out of the story writer's ass due to the structure of the path of events. Not only that, but Crystal has yet to appear in this path at all. She was mentioned as having been flying with Starwolf, but in the ending it's shown that they make up without any build-up, unlike the rest of the paths where she either doesn't rejoin or takes a lot of convincing and even then doesn't feel 100% about it. But here she just forgives Fox without any preemptive dialogue to set it up, just to arbitrarily fulfill the events of the ending that they wanted, even if it went against everything that happened in the rest of the game and was inconsistent to the rest of the paths. They wrote the ending without the logical means to get to the ending, all because of the way the story is structured in this game, and that's just dumb. Speaking of dumb, you then jump forward several years and they now have a kid. Whoa, okay, yeah, we're skipping like 12 steps here, okay? At least buy me a drink first. It's just kind of jarring because a lot of this comes out of nowhere. It's a bit melancholy with the knowledge that you're flying in the final Star Fox mission, but it would have been infinitely more impactful had it had proper build-up and not just been brought up out of nowhere before the final mission. Also, yeah, that's their son in this ending named Marcus, which already puts too many painful images in my head, one of the many reasons I hate the internet, but just look at that little fucker. That is a grade A right there. The A standing for abomination. Jesus Christ, flame broiled with a pinch of salt. Motherfucker's more ugly than my views of humanity. Also, don't tell anyone, but I think he's smuggling cinnamon buns in his hair. And that brings me to probably the biggest problem with the story, and maybe even the biggest problem in the game. It's the same problem that Star Fox 64 had, only much worse, as Star Fox Command is a much more story-based game. A lot of these paths have to account for multiple variables of story being told until the later parts when there are no more branching paths, so a lot of the plot gets thrown in suddenly after the branching stops. Like I said in my last review, the problem with a game with multiple paths like Star Fox 64 is that every path and point where the paths cross over needs to account for multiple variables of story, depending on every way the player can play the game. So either the result is a basic story that doesn't carry over level to level, or the story makes no sense and seems disconnected and incoherent. I used the example of a book where you have the option to shuffle the chapters around. It might be a cool feature, but the story needs to be written either basically or cleverly enough to accommodate the multiple options of what the story can be. In this case, it's the former. You can have 9 different endings, but for each of those endings to have maximum impact, you also need to write 9 stories to build into those endings properly. But you can't do that if you have multiple paths that need to accommodate several branches of story, so the major plot points that need to be thrown in can't be thrown in until the point where there's no more branching paths, usually within the last few levels or so. So they can't build up Fox wanting to quit because the path leading to that ending also leads to Lucy and Crystal, or Starwolf Returns, or Fox and Crystal, or even Emperor Angler, so it comes across as overly rushed. And I know this is not the case, the devs had to come up with a trail of events leading up to the endings on the fly. Oh shit, we haven't set this ending up in any way!
We'll have to improvise.
Sounds good to me. Isn't that just a little bit disrespectful to the source material? Well, you're fucking fired. They sacrificed linear storytelling for gimmicky branching paths, and for a game as story-heavy as Star Fox Command, that was a very big misstep that takes away quite a lot of the impact that these stories could have had. It seems like a case where you had 9 potentially great stories intertwined and fighting for screen space, so what you end up with is a jumbled mess that lacks focus on any one plot thread until the ending sequence where the stories don't have to fight for screen space anymore and are free to breathe, but by that point it's too late, and what needs to be thrown in is haphazardly thrown in without any build-up to accommodate the ending that they're building up to. And it's an unfortunate case when a lot of these endings are quite powerful, but without proper space for these stories leading into them to breathe, they just seem like a waste of potential. It's a genuinely bad design choice that takes away a lot of good that these stories could have done. Pace counts for a lot. If too much happens too quickly, it's exhausting. That and the fact that not being able to properly space out the big plot points due to the story having to accommodate for multiple paths, it means that you get 9 terribly paced, bland stories instead of any one great story, as is the nature of this style of storytelling. But funnily enough, while many of these stories can be quite powerful and compelling, a few of them can be very poorly written as well. It's very inconsistent. It's like they shipped every single storyline to a different writer. Oh, right, and you gave Fox and Crystal to... Jim. Okay, and how about Pigma's Revenge? I gave that to my fat 13-year-old fanfiction-loving daughter. Perfect. And what about Slippy's Resolve? Oh, I gave that to the Bay fellow. Bay? No, you don't mean Michael Bay! Yeah? What have you done? In my opinion, you've just doomed us all! What? Everybody run, the end is nigh! Should I tell him he's running into... I have no explanation. That may be a minor gripe, but it meant that this game has a bit of a tonal mishmash because of how differently each ending feels. You don't know what this game is going for. Is it trying to be sentimental, whimsical, depressing? What? Let's back up though. Does that pretty significant problem of a non-linear story ruin the stories of Star Fox Command? Not necessarily, because no matter what path you choose, there are always upsides to the story. Regardless of what path you choose, almost all the characters have consistent personalities. Fox is brash, headstrong and stubborn, yet heroic, loyal and caring. Once again, among other things, always putting himself in danger regardless of how hopeless everything seems, but also has an air of emotional damage because of how he treated Crystal. He knows that he fucked up the most important thing in his life, and regardless of what path you take, you get an at least compelling conclusion to that plot point. And the dynamic between him and Crystal is usually quite emotional as well. The sequence that really stands out to me is in the path leading to the ending Fox and Crystal. You know, the happy ending. When Fox decides with a heavy heart to find Crystal, only to find that she's rolling with Starwolf, he basically has to thoroughly embarrass himself to get her to tentatively rejoin. Already you have a lot of conflicting emotions present. Fox feeling sorry for cutting off Crystal from the group, trying to make it right and giving her the chance to rejoin, masquerading it as a business decision but ultimately doing it because he wants her back. But now he's also angry at her for daring to join up with his mortal enemies, but Crystal is spitefully doing everything in her power to get back at Fox for how he treated her, forcing her to leave the team, but knows deep down that she still has feelings for him but is too stubborn to admit it. Then later, Slippy uses his newfound knowledge of relationships to be the voice of reason and convinces Crystal to forgive Fox, but then Fox starts feeling betrayed because he can't get over the fact that she joined with his mortal enemies and now is actually treating the whole situation as a business relationship, basically telling her that she can go after she did her part. But in the end, Fox finds the strength in himself to not only forgive Crystal, but more importantly, forgive himself for what he did to Crystal. And she also, after much convincing and mulling it over, finds it in herself to forgive Fox and rejoins the team. It's all solid stuff that provides a decisive arc for all involved. Crystal finally comes into her own as a character. This time she comes across as damaged goods, being angry and spiteful and being unreasonable, but still yearning to be happy again, being held back by her own stubbornness against her own better judgment, having a good heart but being held back by her head. It's made a point that the old caring friendly Crystal is still in there somewhere. Funnily, her stubbornness is what makes her not see that Fox did the right thing. Yeah, kinda like Spider-Man keeping his identity a secret to keep his loved ones safe, Fox knew that she'd be a target of his enemies because it would be the easiest way to get to him.
Oh yeah, and also because he couldn't stand to see her in constant danger.
So he kicked her off the team for her own safety, but she saw it as a betrayal, not being able to see the forest through the trees because of her own stubbornness. It's really gripping stuff. Falco is still Falco, the good-hearted douche who's aloof yet caring but is too dignified to show it, so he comes across as just a cynical ass and secretly really missed the group being together because it's the only time his life had any meaning or excitement. Peppy, who's taken Pepper's role as lead general of Corneria, comes into his own as the elderly leader, and Slippy. Now, I've joked a lot in the past about Slippy being annoying, but he actually has some likability here. He's the emotional glue that brings everybody together, constantly being the voice of reason when everybody's being unreasonable. Yeah, you know what? Slippy, you're all— Ah! Dear Lord, the dead eyes, they're back, and they're worse than ever! Kill it, kill it, kill it! You are a lot more attractive that way. Each of the main cast come across as appealingly human, and once again they may seem unlikable, but a lot of their unlikability stems from what path you choose to take, and even then it's well established why they're not likable, and it provides opportunities for each character to grow and develop, and in some cases they do, and in some cases they don't. And it's just that little bit more organic, and they're justified in their conflict story-wise. It's not just arbitrary conflict for the sake of having it. It's established why all characters have changed and grown apart, but also justifies change when it does happen, and provides compellingly competent character growth. That said, I still do much prefer games with a deliberately designed linear story because a tightly designed narrative means a more compelling story. But this isn't too shabby for what it is. The morals also become appealingly more grayed than before. Crystal joining Starwolf was jarring, but it makes her personality shine through even more. That she's so spiteful and angry towards Fox that she's willing to do a full heel turn. A heel turn almost as sudden and jarring as mine when I read my hate comments. Your salt gives me strength! But even Starwolf comes across as morally ambiguous. As much as they're in it for themselves, in several of the mission paths they end up saving the day with the intention to clear their names and live the glory of being heroes, but they still save the day regardless. And Wolf comes across as his same dignified and pragmatic yet psychotic evil self, but now with a yearning to be able to live a normal life and clear his name, being sick of being the bad guy, and this continues the previous game's theme of making Starwolf out to be more than just the designated villains. Then there's the other guy. Then there's Panther, who's literally the same womanizing posh gentleman show-off dude bro Zoro twat Panther from before, except now he speaks in the third person, and implicitly gets with Crystal, who's doing so deliberately to spite Fox. There's even a path where Fox joins Starwolf because he feels like they're the only people who can help him defeat the Anglers, a dumb choice that leads to the worst endings in the game. It always having been a setup by Crystal to get Fox to use Starwolf to get Andross's terraforming device, which ends up allowing Starwolf to clear their names and finally live happy normal lives like they've wanted to for some time, but everybody else suffers greatly, including Fox, who, well, yeah. Well, now I'm sad. Now I'm happy. And while we're on the subject, let's talk about Andross's device. Let's not take that out of context. A consistent plot device throughout all the storylines is the terraforming device that Andross made with the intention to transform Venom into a habitable planet, but Crystal says at one point that Andross was deemed insane but only wanted to make this device to make Venom habitable, but because they got along like oil and water, Pepper used his power to unjustly banish Andross, which led to war. Like, holy shit! They actually imply that Andross was in the right the whole time, only going insane and kill crazy because of his unjust banishment, not wanting any fame or fortune, only wanting to continue his research. That's insane! Of course, it's never made clear if Crystal was telling the truth or if she was just saying it to fuck with Fox, but this adds not only a ton of shades of ambiguity to the game, but the whole series, with the possibility that Corneria was in the wrong the whole time. And the terraforming device is a focal point of many of the endings, such as the ending Dash Makes a Choice. Dash, Andross's grandson, who's an eager, polite, and professionally young skilled pilot, and a big fan of Star Fox, even insisting that there's no hard feelings between him and Fox despite their family history. He comes across as one of the most genuinely likable and level-headed characters in the plot, but when Dash decides to stay on Venom and oversee its terraforming, he becomes the Emperor of a new world, which sparks another war. Because, to make a pretentious quote, and I'm anything if not pretentious, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like I said, the many shades of gray to the morals add so many intriguing layers to the story, and I love it. It makes every character out to be much more human, not really knowing where the line between good and evil is drawn. And then you're also introduced to Peppy's daughter, Lucy, and the untimely death of her mother, or Amanda, Slippy's fiance, or Bill, who, or Kat, and more. There are a lot more likable characters in this game that come into play depending on which path you choose, and each one has an appealing personality that helps further the development of our main cast. Though there are a few returns that I look at and think, what the hell were they thinking? The most egregious of which... What the butt? Okay. I know he survived a plane crash in Star Fox 64, but everybody does in this series. But he literally was blown to shit in Star Fox Assault, yelling for Andross, one-shotted to further the threat of the Aperoids, and now they just retcon his death for no fucking reason other than fuck continuity? He does nothing. He adds nothing. He is nothing. Oh, well, I suppose if that asshat can survive that, I can survive this. See? At least Pigma and Andross making cameos makes sense. Proto-Pigma is a robot-type thing built from what remained of him after he died, and Andross is nothing more than an apparition left over to protect his device. Oikini was the only return that I think is absolute bullshit. To tentatively move towards a resolution, once again, it's hard to cover the story in detail because of how robust it is, and how many different paths there are to take, but it's absolutely flawed. However, it also can be good. Depending on the path you take, the game can have a good story. I'd say the best paths are the default story that you're forced to take before unlocking the rest of the game, because being the default path, it clearly has a very deliberate design. Then the path leading to Dash Makes a Choice is very good because there's not many points where the story branches off. The path leading to the return of Starwolf and the Curse of Pigma is really good because it's two sides of the same story where everybody suffers from the selfish actions of several characters. And if you take the circuitous path to the ending Fox and Crystal, it fleshes out every character really well and gives enough screen time to each one that you get an idea of their goals, personalities, flaws, morals, etc. in a much more detailed manner than any other path. It can be good depending on the path you take, and if you, the player, make the characters perform selfish or stupid acts, they pay for it in the end with the bad endings. Their development and arcs are up to you depending on how you play the game. The characters will be redeemed for their actions and their personalities, or they will suffer. It's appealingly organic, and the writing is appealingly solid for the most part. The characters have well-written dialogue that each feel unique to their respective personalities and rides the line between pretentious and juvenile. It's nice and solid, but some of the writing can also be pretty bad and come across as bad DeviantArt level fanfiction. I think the latter half of Starwolf Returns is like that. I mean, cursed, Really? And Slippy's resolve in Lucy and Crystal also come across as badly written fanfiction with its X declared eternal love to Y and whatnot. It's pretty bad in some cases. I mean, I think this picture of old Slippy really says it all. Now I can't stop thinking about Slippy's best quotes being said in an old man voice.
Folks, get this guy off me!
Wait, his best quote was him yelling out for help? Shows how memorable you are. It's a commonly accepted theory that the happy ending, Fox and Crystal, is the canon ending amongst the fans, followed closely by Goodbye Fox. Personally, I have a different theory that I'll get into during my Star Fox Zero review, but let's just say, I don't think the overall story would benefit from a completely happy ending. For this series to continue in the direction I'd want it to, the canon ending for Star Fox Command would require being a less than happy ending. More on that on a later date. Star Fox Command, from a story perspective, is a conflicting one for sure. It has a lot of good solid writing and characterization, but the lack of story focus does hurt it quite a bit. The best way I can put it is that it can be good and it can be bad depending on the actions you take and the path that he takes. We are right to put the blame on society these days. And it comes out to a resounding good, mostly. But given what it tried to do versus how it pulled it off, it probably is the worst story in this series thus far, which is unfortunate because it was ambitious in its storytelling but bit off a little bit more than it could chew with its design. But it's not bad by any means, just flawed. It has high points and it has low points, but doesn't really capitalize on the potential it had because of the lack of focus. It's just good, but flawed. I'd rather it had made one great story than 9 conflicting quality stories, but it's still good. But I said I liked this game earlier, right? So where does this game come into its own? Well, it looks quite nice for a DS game. The graphics only seem to be held back by the low resolution of the DS. The models all look great, the landscapes are highly detailed and nice and colorful, the skyboxes look great, the enemy ships are many and fantastically detailed and diverse, and each look varied and colorful in its own way and act unique whether movement, attack, or death. It all looks great and unique. Had it not been for the low resolution screen, I could see this game looking as good as at least an early PS2 game if it were given a proper upscale and good quality anti-aliasing. It's quite impressive, but graphics, as we know, is practically the definition of icing on the cake, so it's not really what sells the game. What about the audio? The music is high quality, crisp sounding music, once again only being held back by the hardware alone. It's catchy, it fits the tone, and takes advantage of the hardware to create the best quality music it can. The sound design, on the other hand, leaves a lot to be desired. It's fairly low quality, it doesn't have the same punchy, visceral effectiveness that the sound effects in previous games had, and there's not even any proper voice acting. They just use Banjo-Kazooie style gibberish. Pretty guerrilla the way the voices are presented, although if you want, you can actually record your own voice to be jumbled up and put in the place of a character of your choosing. Let's try that. Alright, so I have to answer some questions here. Alright. What is my height? Fuck. What is my favorite food? Shit. What is my blood type? Ass. My favorite sport? Bitch. Where was I born? Cunt. That one's actually true. Now let's see how this goes. Ass. Sounds like my last family reunion. It's like the Psalm meets Fox News. So the audio as a whole is about as good as you could expect, given the hardware is about as powerful as a high-end literal potato by today's standards, but that still doesn't really explain why I'm positive on this game. Well, there's one more thing this game has in its bag. The amorphous mass that is the gameplay. The most ambitious, most robust, and most formula-breaking portion of Star Fox Command. The story may have been ambitious, but it doesn't even hold a candle to what the gameplay does. It reinvents everything. So the game starts out in an overworld setting where you manually guide your ships using limited fuel, which you can increase by flying by bases. Then you have enemy fleets and missiles who do the same, like a turn-based Star Fox 2. If you let them get to the Great Fox, the mission has failed. You have limited turns. I can get more turns by taking out bases. You collect missiles on the main map to take out fleets of fighters. Once you make contact with enemies, you engage them in all range mode. You need to collect enemy cores by killing them. You control the movement with the stylus, and every button is shoot. You can play a range of over 10 characters, each of which play differently. You have limited fuel and can recharge by deflecting shots or collecting fuel cells. You can deflect shots or attract items by doing a barrel roll. I submit to the meme. I'm too tired to fight scientific inaccuracies anymore. But each character has a varying amount of health and time they can spin at any given time, as well as different types of weapons. And in the base missions, after you get all of the enemy cores, you take it to the mothership by flying through beacons and spinning into the mothership. And in similar fashion, the missiles can get fucked. Nobody expects the special peen cannon! Missiles are my mortal enemy. You fly through the beacons to catch up to it, then shoot it till it's dead, but it can be bullshit because even if you catch up to the missile, if you miss one beacon, you fail, and these beacons can be really hard to get sometimes. But you also have to shoot the missiles before flying through too many beacons because you will still accelerate, so there's this really slim time window you have to shoot the missile, and these things are merciless in the overworld. On top of that, they're launched constantly, and once it's launched, there's no way to take it out other than head on. How about if you miss 3 beacons in a row, you fail? That would make sense. In any case, once you've collected all the enemy cores, you either complete the mission or fight a boss. Then you move on and pick the path to the next mission. It's so robust and so complex. But is it fun? Contrary to people who don't like this game because of the all-range gameplay, yes, I very much do think it is fun. Yes, this is one of the biggest complaints I've heard about this game, is that there's no traditional gameplay. It's 100% all-range combat, and that's the breaking point from what I've seen from a lot of Star Fox Command detractors. And as I've said in previous reviews, all-range mode has a lot of upside. It's not as good as traditional on-rails gameplay, but it has a lot of good in itself. First of all, the turn-based strategy elements in the overworld are quite fun. It adds the element of clever tactics to how you approach each level. You might need to abort approaching a base because some previously unforeseen enemies are making their way to the Great Fox. You might have to meticulously plan out a very specific path to get everything in one go, or you might even have to restart the mission entirely because you miscalculated the movement of an enemy fleet and they've rushed too far ahead of you. It encourages careful planning and assigning specific roles. What I usually did was I had one person stay back to deal with surprise attacks and missiles, and have the rest go into opposite directions to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time. I'm not much for strategy games, but in this case, it's cleverly implemented and is used in aid of the base gameplay as opposed to just being the base gameplay. And rattling off a series of perfectly planned movements followed by a swift blitzkrieg against the anglers, it makes you feel like a smart-ass military strategist. How would I be as a military strategist? The fuck just happened? Granted, the mechanic where you can clear a small portion of the fog of war using your stylus is a bit of a pisser because it's very much just luck of the draw whether you find what you're looking for or not. Strategy veterans may find it oversimplified, but this isn't what we're here for. It's just icing on an otherwise solid cake. It's not deep, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to be a nice connecting element between gameplay sections that has elements of strategy games, but is not to be complex enough to scare away people who wouldn't otherwise like these types of games. It's just a nice little extra bit to have that makes you think but doesn't go overboard with it. As for the real meat and potatoes of the gameplay, that's where you meet the enemies head on and enter all range mode. Like I said, this is the sticking point that makes a lot of people dislike this game, the fact that all range mode dominates the majority of the gameplay. So you enter these self-contained maps and have to take out a random amount of special enemies while also dealing with many standard enemies that have no real bearing on you other than providing the odd pickup. And when you beat those special enemies, you pick up their enemy cores. I didn't like the idea of being forced to use the touchscreen for movement at first, but believe it or not, it actually grew on me. It gives you a lot more precision than the controls for the previous games. It takes some time to get used to it, but once you get the hang of it, it feels great, tight, responsive, and the shooting, as always, is satisfying as hell. And there's something so wonderful about spinning to deflect the barrages of lasers and picking the moment to blast the shit out of everything in your way. At this point, it should come as no surprise that the act of shooting enemies is cathartic as hell between the juicy explosions, the tight controls, the satisfying shooting, and the rewarding progression and difficulty curvature. It's just fun to shoot shit, just like every Star Fox game before it. Would I have preferred it to be on rails? I suppose. But as I've stated previously, all range mode has a really generous upside. For one, just because you're not on rails, it doesn't mean that the game doesn't feel just as tight and desperately hectic as the on-rail gameplay. gameplay. As well, the expansive levels helps to create the set dressing for the game's self-contained universe. It subtly builds the worlds by letting you slow down and observe the landscapes, and the overarching stories of many of these levels make it clear that things were happening before you got here and will continue to happen after you leave that you have to save. That and the fact that the battles themselves feel like tense, hopeless battles of 100-to-1 odds with everything going on around you that's out of your control that at times can push you to your limits and put you through hell. So, and this is a key returning word in regards to this game, it's just satisfying to push through all these battles with the weight of all of Corneria on your shoulders. Really, this game just feels great to play in every aspect. Are there things I don't like? Well, yeah, of course. There are some major enemies that are harder to kill than most bosses placed randomly throughout the game, and then there's no way to gauge how difficult an encounter will be until you're fighting it. Once again, making it a bit of a piss take what to say Murica to and missile the shit out of. There's no way to be sure if you're blowing up 12 scuttly bastards that are hard to kill or 12 elderly fish people drunk flying. And then there are the fleets with one enemy. Is it the piss easy flying worm, or is it the impossibly hard fish fuck that takes bombs like a redneck takes cheap whiskey? I take offense to that. Look, somebody who's different! Word! Now, the fact that this game's story is presented like an all-out war and the gameplay is what amounts to massive battles, it captures that feeling quite well for what it is. I guess the mini-bosses can be kinda bullshit if you don't know what you're doing. They fly around very quickly and complexly, and as soon as you get one solid hit on them, they immediately do a loop which is slightly slower than yours. What you want to do is get a character like Falco who has a multi-lock laser, and what you want to do is get behind the character you intend to damage and then lock on them until you get max and then unleash the lasers, because they won't loop until you land an attack, and a single max-powered laser takes out a ridiculous amount of their health. And what you also want to do is blow up every bomb that you see so you can get fuel cells, because you have a timer that represents your fuel, and if you run out, you die, which adds an extra layer of tension to the gameplay. But in these cases where these mini-bosses can take a lot of hits, it can be really frustrating to waste a lot of time trying to fight these bosses only for you to run out of fuel right before you beat them. And if you run out of time, you lose a life, because 5, technically 6 games in, and Nintendo still insists on having lives. So the fuel system can add a lot to the missions where you're taking out many enemies in a short amount of time, but I wish they'd eliminate it for the bosses. But the true bosses are all, as per usual, frickin' sweet. As I said, there are 32 missions, so I would be loath to talk about every boss in detail, but as per usual, they all feel incredibly climactic. The two that really stand out in my mind are Death Crab and Emperor Angler, because they both use proper pacing and escalation to slowly build tension until they fire it all off with their final forms where they go all out. They're really quite fun. Not every level boss is on that level, of course, but at least a good majority of them feel really properly tense and climactic. Then there are the Mothership levels. They are where it's at. There are these extra hard levels where you need to get all of the enemy cores and take the mothership head on, which you do by driving through beacons and spinning the fuck out of it until it explodes.
Oh, boys! I'm
Okay, maybe it's not as cool as it sounds, but it still feels awesome, especially when the lasers of the mothership will take out half of your remaining health, making it a huge monkey on your back and encouraging strategic placement and battlefield awareness, and if the time is right, bombing the shit out of everything in sight. That was an unintentional rhyme, sorry. In this game, as opposed to previous games where you can only fire bombs in front of you, here using the touchscreen, you can bomb anywhere on the map, which feels so great. Getting your ass kicked? Bomb it. Want to make short work of a fleet of huddled enemies? Bomb it. Want to get out of an awkward situation? Bomb it. Want to get out of class? Bomb it. Want to bake a cake in record speed? Bomb it. Want to finally cancel The Simpsons? Bomb it. Order now at 1-800-FUCK-IT-1. That's 1-800-FUCK-IT-1. Order now and receive a free ballistic missile vibrator. Feel the freedom. This offer will be discontinued as soon as the military executes us for treason. Well, anyway, the bombs are pretty good. Granted, every character has a different amount of bombs that they can carry at any given time, so each character's situational usefulness varies, especially with each character having varying levels of health and different types of weapons. They each play subtly different from how quickly they move to how they shoot, and it adds a nice variety to the gameplay. Some characters like Slippy lack a lock-on but have powerful attacks, or Panther, who is the most grossly overpowered character in the game and can pretty much take out anything in his path in one shot but lacks an auto-fire. There's so many different ways to play this game, and it adds so many layers to the strategy. Who do you use for what in this current situation? Who's the best to take out the missiles? Who can handle the bosses the best? Who has the most bombs and can take out the swarming enemies the fastest? It adds so many different ways to play the game, but it never feels different. It adds an insane amount of variety between the enemies, playable characters, weapons, environments, bosses, and ways to play that it squeezes everything out of a single mechanic that it can. Much like the previous games, it gets everything out of a single mechanic and never sacrifices its simplicity to achieve the variety, or bolts on extra gameplay mechanics to add arbitrary variety. It creates organic variety while also being being a satisfying, cathartic experience with tight controls, creative elements, great progression and difficulty, clever but not overbearing strategy, a fun mix of new gameplay and old, and to tie it all up, it has the same hectic intensity and great satisfaction of doing everything from shooting to spinning to seeing the mission complete message that this series is known for, and the difficulty as ever ramps up at a constant pace, making every accomplishment just as satisfying as the last, building up to the final mission which kicks your ass and gives you the greatest feeling of accomplishment when it's over. It's a really solidly designed experience that's built for maximum excitement, tension, satisfaction, and catharsis that keeps you on the edge of your seat from the beginning to the end, and makes every level feel just as great as the last one, and constantly escalates in every aspect to keep you engaged but keeps it fair so you're always pushed to your limit but you don't feel outclassed. It's a great game to play. It feels really good to play, quite frankly. Though it's much different, it's still a very solid experience top to bottom. Is it perfect? No, not by a long shot. Everything I've just said does come with two massive caveats. The gameplay can be straight up frustrating at times with how hard it is. Until you get the hang of it, it's relentless and can seriously be rage quit inducing levels of hard. There's so much going on, so much that can kill you, so many arbitrary health levels. You will get your ass kicked up and down a country mile if you're not prepared for just how unforgiving this game can be, especially with the happiest ending, which is obviously the hardest to get. It's ridiculous with how difficult it can be at times. And the repetition. Star Fox Command is no doubt built for shorter play sessions because it's a very repetitive experience. Each of these mission paths will last you about 2 hours, and they have you doing the same thing over and over, which can be very repetitive. What do? You shoot shit, shoot shit, shoot shit, and that's pretty much it. Nothing more to it than that. There was a severe space limitation on the DS cartridges, so it makes sense why there's a lot of repetition, but that's still no excuse. You will do the same thing over and over pretty much until the game's over. Of course, I said earlier that there is a lot of variety, but the base gameplay itself doesn't really have much at all. If you're less forgiving than I, there's no doubt that this game is relentlessly frustrating and repetitive. And I would pick most Star Fox games over Command, and I would never play it 9 times to see all the possible endings, but on a whole, it's a very solid experience that's absolutely worth a try, and definitely kept me hooked for the time I played it. But that does raise the question, does Star Fox Command deserve the flack it gets? Not necessarily. It does take a lot of creative liberties with the source material, and it does change a lot, some of which is good and some of which sucks, but overall it's a solid experience. If you're into this series enough to consider this a betrayal, that's fine, but for me it changes enough to be interesting and keeps what needs to be kept to keep me invested. Some of these choices may have been head-scratching, but given that I was expecting the worst Star Fox game ever and came out of it positively, I can't really knock any of it. It's a flawed but solid experience. I don't think it deserves the flack it gets, but that's just me. However, I do want to stress that Star Fox Command is in fact the worst Star Fox game I've yet to play. But that doesn't mean it's a bad game. No, it's simply the worst in a very, very good series. Simply because something's not as good doesn't mean it's not good. And I can definitely see why people wouldn't like this game. Yeah, it's very rough around the edges in parts, but overall, I enjoyed it. Even though I can see why people wouldn't like it, I enjoyed it. It can be tedious, it can be repetitive, it can be boring, but for some reason, I came through thinking it was a pretty solid game. Do I think it's an amazing game? No. Do I think it's a great game? No. Do I think it's a good game? Yes. It's not a fantastic experience for the most part, but it's a very enjoyable experience, at least from my point of view. So I understand why one wouldn't be able to like this game, but at the end of the day, I do like this game. And that's really the only summary I can give. So, does Star Fox Command pass the nostalgia test? By a slim margin, yes. It is a very flawed game. There's no denying that. I will not deny that. You won't deny that. Nobody will deny that. But the fact is, I had so much fun with it to the point that I couldn't possibly say that it's not a good game. And you know what? Star Fox Command, it still holds the streak because I have yet to play a Star Fox game that I didn't like. Even though people don't like this one, I did, and it keeps the streak alive. Woo! Woo! Okay then, look at the time. Wow, I was hoping for a shorter review, but fuck knows, apparently that's not gonna happen ever. This has gone on too long. I need to make up for lost time. Don't ask. Oh yeah, Star Fox 64 3D is also a thing, and it has a title like a license plate, but it's exactly like Star Fox 64 right down to the voice acting. Except Falco doesn't know who Einstein is anymore.
Hey genius, I'm on your side!
Worst game ever, 10 out of 10. The members of Star Fox have all gone their separate ways. Pepper replaces Pepper as head general of Corneria. Turns by taking out the bases. If you can collect missiles on the main menu, map,
His mind is deviated, but... Holy shit.
rails doesn't mean it doesn't feel just as tight and desperately hectic as the What? Retail gameplay? What the Okay, what the fuck? Right. Alright, so you see these games right here? I guarantee you by the end of this video, they will have fallen over at least twice. Mark my fucking words. Do I like Star Fox Command? Where the fuck is the game? I forgot to grab the game. You'll never take me alive, fuckers! I seriously fucking shoulder checked the wall twice for you fuckers. Get off, fuck meth! Oh my god, my voice. Oh shit, forgot to fucking turn on the lights. Look, somebody who's different! Ow! My face! Fuck, I'm injuring myself all over the place. I just lunged face first into a door. What's up people, TGX here. So, thank you for sitting through this video, which was significantly longer and more work than I was hoping and thinking it was going to be. So yeah, that's a thing. So don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications, which is the button that's right next to the subscribe button. Otherwise, you might not get all my notifications of all the videos that I'm uploading. And you might have also been unceremoniously unsubscribed, so do check just to make sure you're still subscribed if you're not already. So, other than that, don't forget to subscribe to Innocent Christoph Gavin for his help with this video. I couldn't have done it without you, bro. And like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. All those links are in the description. Other than that, TGX over, out, and I'll see you next time.